Hi folks, Russ here again, having more Daisy lever gun fun. And this is going to be the final installment for this double gun that I started a little while back. I gave some progress reports on it, and this is pretty much all we're going to do to this one, unless I get some special requests on it. Whenever I make one of these double guns, it's a novelty because after all, you don't really have a need for two guns co-joined together unless you're looking for something special. And whenever I have fun with these, sometimes my creativity goes awry. I've done other copies of these, but I've always used the Buck 105s to build them. This is built out of two Red Riders, the 1938 Bs. And you might say, well, if that's the case, then where are those the fake magazine on the bottom and the forearms? Well, we removed both of those. Took the forearms off and took the fake magazine tube off the bottom of the gun. This gives a little more length without having to lengthen the barrels. So let me just explain what I've done here, and we'll start from the very front and work our way back. If you look at the front of this gun, you're going to see what looks like two pieces of pipe that are holding the front together. That's really not two pieces of pipe. Whenever these guns were designed back in the day, they had a smaller tube here that fit inside of a larger tube back here. And they still keep those same diameters pretty much with the sheet metal tubing that they use. So what I've done is, to keep the front of the gun stable, I took two pieces of a gun that I tore apart from back here on the receiver, silver soldered them together, and made a sort of a figure 8 that caps over top of the muzzle of the gun. Now these plastic muzzles are the original ones, but to make them fit in here, I cut off the ramp sights that were on the front. That's why I have these two beaded sights. These are actually just two BBs that I've attached to the front here. Whenever I was able to put these back in, to hold everything in place, I used a small sheet metal screw that went all the way into the plastic muzzle on each one of these guns. Now, if you'll notice, the loading port on the front of the gun is always on the left side. Well, if that's the case, you couldn't have the loading port for this right side of the gun in the middle. You'd never get BBs into it. So what we've done here is created an effect to put the loading port on the outside of the right barrel also. To do that, and if you look closely, you can see the seam. This is the bottom seam. You can see that right there, of the gun. And I've taken a piece of tubing and made an inner sleeve. Whenever I put this on, I spun it 180 degrees, reattached it with that inner sleeve, and now I've got a loading port on both sides of the gun so I can load both barrels evenly. These guns are not the most current production. These are the ones that do not have the anti-bear trap ratcheting system inside that's attached to the triggers. If you'll notice, whenever you cock it, you don't hear that ratcheting sound. I purposely did not put the notched ramp elevators back into the rear sight because the front sights are a little lower, and I wanted to keep these sights as low as possible without having to do any cutting on them or regrinding of a groove or anything like that. Not that this gun is going to be very accurate. After all, you can only do so much to these before you lose things like accuracy and force. These guns, as I stated in an earlier video, probably came out of two different manufacturing areas because the roll stamping is slightly different. Even though they're the same basic model gun, welding tacks up here on these sights look a little different. There's a few other minor differences, but all the dimensions are exactly the same. What I've done in the past is put a common sight in the center. I've done some filling, put a common sight in the center, bridged this over, taken a single sight, rear sight, and mounted it to the bridging. And so it looked more like a double barrel shotgun, but we all know this isn't a shotgun. This is a, not even a double barrel. It's a co-joined 2-rifle. Because if you see this looks like the head of a screw here. Well, whenever you're trying to put these spring retainers in and out, if you have the original rivet that has a head on both sides in each gun, you'd never be able to make the guns fit tightly together because the heads of the rivet would butt each other. So we've ground out those rivets, and as I've done for several other guns, which I explained in an earlier video, I made my own bolts, and I made one up here that goes all the way through both receivers, and it holds those spring retainers pretty well. Now the lever looks a little odd, right? There's a block spacer in here, and I'm going to talk a little more about the lever and why I did block spacing and how I got this aligned in a minute. I made bolts for the stock. This is a continuous bolt that goes all the way through, holding both trigger assemblies. And the reason I make the bolts rather than just going to the hardware store and buying a long bolt and put in there, it's because I want a smooth shaft on the inside of the bolt. So I thread one end, we put a nut on it, and do a little peening, a little bit of soldering if you have to. These are just peened, and that holds the head in place. Then I chase a thread on the other side, and I'm able to put screws and tighten everything down. The reason you want to do that, or at least the reason I did it, is so that this thing can be totally disassembled. I don't have any rivets or anything on this particular gun that is going to be permanent so that I can't take the guns apart for maintenance. The stock on this, because I didn't want this one to have the wide stock, like taking two stocks and put them together all the way back. So this was actually cut out by another gentleman, and I happen to have a blank made out of oak that he had, and I fashioned it into the top. See, I cut out the center so that the radius on this side and on that side stops up here, and I could use a square piece of wood coming into the back of the receiver. These pieces, and if you notice, they're a different grain than the oak on the buttstock. These pieces actually came from a Red Ryder stock. I cut it, and then I split it with the saw and attached it to the outside of this so that it now has the same radius as the original guns, and it fits the size-wise going into it. Worked out pretty well, I think. Now I only have the narrower profile of the stock for the shoulder piece and to be able to get your hand around it like that. Okay, now I was going to explain to you why I made the caulking levers the way I did. These are two regular caulking levers. See, this one says Daisy, that one says Daisy. And this is a little unfinished, so if you'll notice in here, the wood blocking is made to fit inside of the of the lever loop, and the solid blocking is the right width to fit between the two levers up here. And I attached those and did a little bit of filling so they would fit in tight, because these are the plastic levers. They're made of polypropylene. Nothing really sticks to them, so any attachments you have to bind against them, and also you need a good mechanical fit. So I have tacks going in here and a screw holding the face of the block in. It's very solid that way. One of the reasons I did that is because there is always a problem if you're using two guns, and let's say the two guns aren't exactly the same model or exactly the same year span. What you're going to have is the two caulking levers may not be exactly the same. Now, what I did to solve the problem of that not aligning, you see how if you take two of them, what you may end up with is the point that engages the back of the plunger. If those points don't line up totally perfect, whenever you go to caulk them both together, the one that sticks out the furthest is going to set the caulking against the sear inside, and the other one's going to be left short. I actually had that problem with one of the guns that I made, and I had to readjust. I had to regrind and make sure everything was in say, full accord here. So what I did to make these is, if you can see here a little bit, I don't know if I can get that lined up just right. The hole in the center, I made sure that a bolt was through there and it held those together. I laid my layout of this on a flat surface, held it down so these were exactly parallel, and then I built everything in the back end of the levers from there. This is the most critical part, and it worked out well. The levers that I made for that gun, the co-joined levers, are brand new plastic levers. I did not use the original levers that came with the gun. Another thing that I had consideration of is, do I really want this to be a powerful gun? Well, for my money, I say no. Because if it's too powerful, you're not going to be able to caulk it properly. I understand that the double barrel guns Daisy had back in the day had an issue about that too. People were complaining about how hard they were to caulk. And I think that's one of the reasons they redesigned the levers to pivot higher now than they used to whenever they had the low pivoting levers, because it makes it easier to caulk. So inside of the gun, whenever I had the receivers torn apart, I put a lighter spring inside. You're not going to get the same performance out of it, but the lighter springs do make it easier to caulk the guns. And so let me show you what this looks like. With this wide lever assembly, if you will, you can get a good grip on it. Whoops, I got it in my own way here. Caulk it up. You notice the no bear trap sound. And this gun has select fire. In other words, maintaining the two trigger assemblies lets you either fire the right one and then the left, or the left and then the right, or both together. So it's a lot of fun being able to shoot two BBs at one time, especially whenever they come side by side. They're not following each other out of the shot tube. I have not put the staple back in this side. Of course, the staple would be hidden on that side. But I did not put it back on this side. I may do something on there like, I don't know, maybe a carabiner, or I may just leave an open loop on it. We'll see. We'll see. So anyways, this is the breakdown of the double gun. And to tell you the truth, they're a lot of fun. This is Slightly different from any of the others that I've done. Each one is different. One of them I did, my first rendition, it had a wide homemade stock on it that was the same width as both guns put together. The second one, oh, and it also had single loop that they were attached but with a large ring loop on it. The second one, the second rendition of the ones I've done, it had the narrow stock. It had two co-joined levers in here, and then this was cut off and had a single piece of steel holding the lever in the back. So it had a thin piece of steel that you caulked both levers with. This one's a little different. I even toyed around with the idea of keeping two separate levers. Just like you have select fire, you could also caulk them independently, and it might make it a little easier. You can keep the heavier springs in them. But I gave in and decided to try a single block caulking assembly for that. Now, if you'll look at the color, you're probably wondering, what in the world is that color? Well, it's kind of a goldish silver kind of a color. And I've used this before on other guns, such as the pseudo-military style guns that I like to make out of the wide frame daisies, like this. Same color, looks kind of nice. This one happens to be a super carbine. If you notice how short the barrel is, the sight has been moved back and reattached on there. Loading hole on the top. I recreated a shot tube for it. Made a nice nylon sling in that old style coloring. And this is actually a piece of stripped down wood that was original to the gun. Had a real nice patina to it and a nice coloring, like sort of a poplar look. And inset in here, I put a U.S. military lapel pin. Of course, we have the aluminum butt plate. So this is kind of nice because I thought this color offset it real well. I wanted to try to use the same color on the double barrel. Nice thing about doing this, you don't feel bad. If I were to do bluing or something on one of these, I might feel bad if it didn't turn out and I had to repaint it. Whenever you're painting something, hey, if you don't like it, you do a little sanding, shoot a different color. But I really like the way these colors work out. So here it is, folks. This is a little explanation of the double gun. And if you have any questions, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, whenever we talk about some more projects, this is Russ, and have a great night.